Our next speaker is an old friend, and it's Professor Nick Tideman. Nick has been senior economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He graduated economics at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman.
I had a couple courses from Friedman, yeah.
A couple of courses. And he taught at Harvard, and then for the last, I think about 16, 17 years at...
I'd say it's been more than that. I've been at 34 years at Virginia Tech.
34 years at Virginia Tech. Nick, at one point, gave us a talk on why we should use bricks as money. And the idea, from my point of view, was all the people who believed in commodity money, gold and silver is what usually comes to mind. And yet, we understood what was going on. These were really investors in gold and silver coins, or investors in gold mines. And that was their real motivation. And they were making a huge mistake, because if it's good as an investment, it's no good for money. And in any case, if for some strange reason got turned into money, it would all have to be confiscated again anyway, the way Roosevelt had to do. Because it's the government making it valuable, why should it make a private investment valuable? Anyway, the idea there was that he was showing, in my view, now he may really believe in that kind of money, that's fine with me, but in my view, he was demonstrating to our group that it's not a question of gold and silver for commodity money. If you really like commodity money as an idea, then house bricks were pretty good. Now, of course, we're not promoting commodity money in AMI, but Nick today is going to give a discussion of seigniorage, and he's framed it within local currency movements. Now, again, the AMI does not promote local currency movements because we consider this a national problem that has to be solved. We're happy to work with any local currency movement, and we give them talks on monetary history and try to bring them up to speed on what has happened, because without the history, it's difficult for them. And we warn them of some of the difficulties of what they're about to start. But the question of seigniorage there will lead to a discussion of seigniorage, and this is another word that's being driven from the English language. If you write seigniorage on your computer sometime in any kind of study you're doing, it comes up with a red underline, not in the dictionary. So we're going to have an explanation. I'm sure as part of this talk, we'll have right?
Yep.
We'll have an explanation of seigniorage. What we're trying to do with with the Monetary Transparency Act is measure that seigniorage. That will tell us what this money creation privilege, yes, we know it's credit creation privilege, what that's worth to the banking system. And once we know what that's worth, we'll know what's at stake in fixing it. Please welcome Professor Nick Tideman.
Yeah. So today I'd like to talk about seigniorage, its just distribution, and the relation of that to local money systems. So we need a definition first. And seigniorage is simply profit from the production of money. The origin of the word, I believe, is that the seigneur is the lord, the person who puts his face on the money, the person who guarantees what money is worth, and he stamps a coin an ounce, and it's really only 90% of an ounce or something like that, so he makes a tenth of an ounce of gold with every coin he stamps with his face. So seigniorage was the profit, the difference between the cost of producing the money, well, the difference between what you could get by selling money and the cost of producing it if you were lucky enough to be able to produce it. Originally, it applied to coins. We extended to paper money. The cost of producing a $100 bill is probably only a few cents, so the seigniorage on the production of a $100 bill can be very large indeed. One of the aspects of seigniorage is that it permits governments to raise revenue without obtaining consent for taxation by those who are governed. if you wanted a government that was subject to control by people, you wouldn't want the government to be able to generate seigniorage for itself without concern for what the population thought of what it was doing. The production of paper money in excess of what is needed for stable prices is like a tax in that it generates inflation, and you don't have to get the people to agree to be taxed. And so it's not only undemocratic, but it's dangerous to the well-being of people. Now, then there's the question of how does seigniorage relate to banks? We talk about money being both currency and demand deposits, and perhaps other kinds of deposits, whether we're talking about M1 or M2 or M3. If you have a system in which not anybody who wants to can open a bank, then there's going to be a kind of a monopoly profit of owning a bank. And because you can get money for deposit at very low rates of interest and then lend it out at a much higher rate of interest, and that capacity of a bank to earn a monopoly profit is very much akin to seigniorage. And I think that that's why Steve wants to put the seigniorage into the Monetary Transparency Act to draw a connection between the profits of banks and
it's, you said it's a power to tax. It's a private power to tax.
Yes. Well, we regulate banks to some extent, but I would say it's the private power to collect money without being productive. Yeah. Now, you could have a system in which where banking was not a privilege, where anybody who wanted to would be allowed to open up a bank. If you had a system of that sort, you would expect that in the long run, banks would only get the same return on their investment that other industries did. There wouldn't be any special monopoly profit. What would happen instead is that banks would find ways to either pay the depositors interest or give them services or one thing or another, so that there wasn't any excess profits in the banking business. And you could say that in that case, what could be a social profit from the possibility of seigniorage would be dissipated in advertising and in services that weren't worth what they cost. So it seems to me that seigniorage is a kind of a gift of money for nothing in a sense. And it's as long as you're going to have a monetary system that doesn't involve 100% reserves, there's going to be the possibility of seigniorage in the system. And it's important to ask what is the just distribution of that seigniorage. And it's my contention, although this is debatable perhaps, that a well-informed population making a constitutional decision about the distribution of seigniorage would want seigniorage to be distributed equally among the population. If you need to expand the money supply, put the same amount of money in everybody's bank account. Don't let anybody get the special privilege of getting the seigniorage. Don't let the government grab the seigniorage for its purposes that don't necessarily have the agreement of the population. Now, that's just a guess on my part of what people would want to do with seigniorage if they thought about it carefully. I think it deserves discussion. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my suggestion. I think that accords with basic notions of justice and keeps governments from getting out of control. Well, what about bank profits? So if you have fractional reserve banking, there's a potential for persistently profitable banks. It's unjust to give bank charges to some person and not to others. It's inefficient to allow the potential profit of banks to be competed away. In my view, there are reasons of stability to require 100% reserves for demand deposits. This is the main point on which Steve and I agree, I believe, although we disagree on a variety of other things. And if you have 100% reserves required for demand deposits, this eliminates the persistent profit of banks. So let me just go on about that for a couple of minutes. It seems to me there's something fundamentally immoral about the idea of demand deposits. For a banker to say, yes, you can come in and get your money whenever you want, and by the way, everybody else can do it too, but no, it isn't possible for everybody else to do it. It's the fundamental problem of borrowing short and lending long. There's a big article on the subject in just those terms in the Economist magazine this week, or last week, the most recent one. So I think that we need to eliminate the idea of demand deposits. Or if a bank wants to say to a customer, you can get your money anytime you want, and they have to have the money in the vault so that the customer can get it anytime he wants. Now, if you disagree with me and you think, no, you want a system of where there's going to be persistent profits in banks, but less than 100% reserves, and not everybody can get into the banking business, then the only way to continue to have justice, it seems to me, is to auction off bank charters on a rental basis. Just like I think you ought to auction off the rights to the spectrum. If you're going to have a certain amount of people who have this privilege, this private opportunity that other people don't have, rent it out to the highest bidder. So, if you have a 100% reserve requirement for demand deposits, there would be a huge increase in government seigniorage. Well, instead of having the banks either get it or compete it away, all the profit from printing paper that people treat as money, or having deposited people treat as money, would be profit for the whole population to be shared as seigniorage. But it's my view, and I think it's interesting to discuss this. Steve and I should talk about it more sometime. I think the increase in seigniorage would not be as great as he estimates, because I think that if we had a prohibition on demand deposits with less than 100% reserves, people would learn to pay their bills with something other than demand deposits. So a lot of people now use money market accounts. Some people, I believe, even use brokerage accounts. You have a bunch of shares of GM stock or whatever with Charles Schwab, and you write a check out and you instruct Charles Schwab to sell some of your GM shares and pay the bill, or however they do that. So I think that people would have to get used to the idea that if they are going to have an investment that yields them a return rather than just being a storage of their money, they need to take some risk. I believe that just a few days ago there was some money market company that went out of business, and all the people who had their accounts with this company lost their money. I don't know what percentage that they lost, but it seems to me it would make more sense to just have everyone understand that you can have accounts on which you pay bills and earn interest, and sometimes you get a profit and sometimes you get a loss, because these are going to be real investments that carry some risk with them, and you share the risk with everybody else who's investing in this pool of real investments with real possibilities of risk. So someday your bank statement says, in the last quarter we lost 2.5% our investments, so we took 2.5% off of your balance. It would be a different kind of world, but I think that's the kind of world that we would get to if we said that we have to have 100% reserves on demand deposits. If you are going to have an increase in seigniorage, it's all the more important that I believe that it not go just to the government to decide how to distribute, but that the government have an obligation to distribute it uniformly over the population. Then we get to the question of how does seigniorage relate to local money systems. In the local money system, a bunch of citizens and businesses get together, print some things, call it Ithaca money, bark shares, whatever it might be, and they pass it around among themselves to buy stuff in the local economy. So if you are part of a group of people who are printing a local money, you have the equivalent of an interest-free loan for those who issue the money. You print a bunch of pieces of paper, and people take those pieces of paper that you print and give you money that you can spend in other ways. So it transfers resources to you because you are able to print this stuff that people take and don't expect interest, don't expect to earn interest on. So local money is Well, the printing costs are low. There is the seigniorage equivalent in the form of getting resources without having to pay any debt on it. So if you have local money, you should ask what is just with respect to how those seigniorage profits are distributed. So if I were in discussions with people about local money that was going to happen, I would suggest that the seigniorage ought to be distributed in some way through the local government to everybody in the community, not just to the people who are in on the collective group that's printing the money. It's important to note, it seems to me, that seigniorage reduces the demand for cash balances in national currencies. If you're living in a city that's using a bunch of Berkshires or whatever the local money might be, I would guess that you don't need to keep as many dollars in your pocket. It's probably a pretty small effect compared to the national currency, but if we ever got a really widespread local currency movement, there could be, it seems to be, a rather substantial reduction in the demand for national currencies. And so then it seems to me we face the question of what is just with respect to the seigniorage from the local currency relative to the seigniorage from the national currency, and the whole question of how the profits of seigniorage are divided. I think that there could be no doubt that a system of local currencies would reduce the seigniorage from national currencies. And so I would say that if the seigniorage from national currencies is not being distributed justly, if we have a world where the seigniorage goes to whoever's ever in a political position to grab it, I'm not going to be too concerned about local currencies. If we have a system of everybody grabs what they can, why not let the local people grab some for themselves when they're not getting it any other way? However, if we have a system in which the seigniorage from a national currency is being distributed justly, then, in my view, any community that issues a local currency should have their shares of the seigniorage reduced by such an amount that the rest of the nation does not lose by the issuance of the local currency. So if we have a system agreement that we're all going to share the seigniorage equally, and Ithaca decides to issue its own money, they should be free to do that if they want to, but if that means the demand for US dollars goes down in Ithaca so that we don't get the same national seigniorage, we reduce the Ithaca share of national seigniorage by as much as we lose by the fact that they have their local currency. That, it seems to me, is only fair. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.